Hello everyone, welcome to today's Cambridge University Press ELT webinar. I'm very pleased to welcome Chris Redston, face-to-face author, as our presenter today. Chris has been a teacher and coursebook writer for 25 years and has taught in Turkey, Argentina, Italy and the UK. He's just completed the second edition of Face-to-Face with his co-author Gilly Cunningham. Over to you, Chris.
Hello everyone from Cambridge and welcome to today's webinar. Thank you all very much indeed for joining me today, and it's great to see so many people here from all over the world. I've caught people from Croatia and Brazil and Russia, some from Buenos Aires. Hola, I used to work in Buenos Aires. Nice to see you. And Boston and Switzerland and Bosnia, many other places. So thank you all very much for joining me today. Also, apologies to anyone who was hoping to listen to this talk last week. I was still on my honeymoon this time last week, so I didn't get back till Thursday, so we had to postpone for a week. But very nice to have you all here today, and it's great to be back in Cambridge. Okay, while we were waiting to start, I asked you to think of reasons why speaking activities might not be successful in class. And we've got lots and lots of good ideas of why speaking activities might not work. Here are some of the ones I thought of before the session, and I think all of these have been mentioned by people in the feedback on the chat box. One problem might be that the language needed is too high, that the task is too difficult for the language students have. And we all know what happens when that occurs in class. They start speaking in their own language if they can. Also, students might not have enough ideas, so they don't really know what to say. It's not the language, they don't have the ideas. And this is often because students haven't had time to prepare the talk, haven't had time to prepare for their speaking activity. Also, sometimes the activity just doesn't last long enough. You can spend ages setting it up and it's finished in 2 minutes. We've all had that happen to us as well, I'm sure. And this is something a lot of people mentioned on the chat box. The student aren't interested in the task, so the activity itself needs to be inherently interesting, if possible, to motivate students to complete it. Also, sometimes the activity doesn't have a clear outcome, so students aren't sure what they need to achieve. And again, this is something a lot of people mentioned. The instructions might be unclear, so students aren't sure what to do. And the last thing I had, which was mentioned by lots of people, is that a lot of students are shy and don't really like speaking in class in front of other people. Other comments I've had was Craig mentioned that students might well be tired at the end of the day. Helena also mentioned that it was shy, and other people mentioned people being not very confident about speaking. And that's a really interesting point, because as we look through the webinar, we'll look at ways to help students become more confident about speaking. And I think a lot of that is in the preparation for the speaking task, which we'll get onto in a minute. Firstly, though, here's a summary of what we're going to be talking about today. Firstly, I'm going to discuss a little bit about accuracy and fluency. Then we're going to look at controlled speaking practice activities. After that, a little bit about vocabulary speaking activities. Then freer speaking activities. We'll be discussing the teacher's role in these activities and other ways to increase the amount of speaking in your class. And at the end, there'll be 10 or 15 minutes, which is time for your questions. So any questions you have, you can send in at the end of the webinar, or send them in now, and Alistair will collect them and feed them to me at the end. Okay, so Accuracy and fluency. Well, when I did my first teacher training course, which was 25 years ago now, there was a lot of discussion about accuracy and fluency. We were told that we need to do control practice to improve accuracy. And by control practice, I mean exercises that focus only on one area of language that you taught in that class. And we need to do free practice to improve fluency. And by free practice, I mean practice that includes all sorts of different types of language, not just the one you've taught in the class. And, for a few years, I followed this model and did lots of heads-down control practice after the grammar presentation, and then the free speaking activity at the end of the lesson. But after a while, I started to wonder about this distinction, and it made me think, why can't we work on both accuracy and fluency at the same time? It seemed to me we should be helping students to be both accurate and fluent in every speaking activity. However, I often found the material I was using didn't often help students achieve this. And in lots of course books at that time, and also even today, often the only proper speaking was right at the end of the lesson. In particular, a lot of the controlled practice in course books was often very boring and uncommunicative. Back then, and even now, sometimes it's just gap fills and little writing exercises in the back of the book, which have random sentences, nothing to do with the topic of the lesson. And I kind of feel that that kind of exercise is fine for homework, but feels a waste of precious class time. So when Gilly and I started designing face-to-face, we felt we needed a different approach to control practice. So we asked ourselves, how can we make control practice more communicative and meaningful? Basically, we felt that if we could improve the way control practice worked in the class, we could add a lot more speaking to the lessons. So speaking isn't just the fluency at the end of the lesson, it's all the way through the lesson. We felt that students still need to do controlled writing exercises, gap fills, word order, choose a correct word, those kind of exercises, to help their accuracy. But we need to take the exercises off the page and turn them into interesting, meaningful speaking activities in the classroom. We also need to personalize the exercises so students can talk about themselves, people they know, their opinions and experiences. Because all our experience showed that if they're talking about their lives and the lives of people they know, it's much, much easier for them to join in a communicative speaking activity. So this is what we aim to do in face-to-face, to bring the control practice off the page and make them into speaking practices in the classroom. And there are lots of little techniques we've used for that, which of course are in the book, but you can also use for other material if you're using other course books. Let's have a look at some examples to show you what I mean. Okay, this is a fairly standard fill in the gaps exercise for the language too much, too many, or enough, all on the same topic of bringing up children. One thing used to drive me crazy with course books was random sentences that weren't connected to the topic. So we try and make sure all the sentences are part of the topic of the lesson. So for example, here students fill in the gaps. So fathers don't spend enough time with their children. Children watch too much TV. They should play outside more. 18-year-olds aren't mature enough to have children, etc. So they do the gap fill as normal. Then we ask them to tick the sentences they agree with. So this asks them to react to the sentences, which are quite contentious, some of them, to see if they agree or disagree. Then it becomes a speaking activity where students work in groups and compare their answers, giving reasons, and decide which sentences they all agree or disagree with. So just by asking students to react to the sentences and discuss them, it turns a heads-down control practice into a communicative speaking activity. Here's another example, again from pre-intermediate. This, as you'll recognize, is for second conditional, where students have to put the verbs in the right form and then complete the sentences for themselves. Of course, this kind of practice is very important because the verb forms are crucial to second conditionals. But because all the sentences begin with I, it means that next we can ask the students to work in pairs and compare sentences and continue the conversation if possible. So again, we have taken a rather heads down gap fill, brought it off the page and made it a speaking activity. Here's another example for the infinitive of purpose. Firstly, students do some examples where they have to decide why tourists go to these places. For example, tourists go to Nevada to see the Grand Canyon, not for seeing the Grand Canyon or for to see. So this piece of language, which for a lot of language is difficult, it gives them very controlled practice of that. So they write sentences. But then we ask them to work in pairs and ask each other why they go to the places. So why do tourists go to Nevada? To see the Grand Canyon. Because we often found that the answers to why questions, students don't naturally answer with to see or to do. So it gives them practice of that. Then we ask students to complete the sentence stems using the infinitive of to and their own ideas. I need some money to buy a new car. I often go online to check my email, etc. Then they work in pairs, take turns to say their sentences, and ask follow-up questions. And we use follow-up questions a lot to help students continue the conversation. And a final example, here's a fairly standard choose the correct words exercise for this quantifier language: too much, too many, hardly any, not enough, etc. So students choose the correct words here. So for example, there are no recycling bins in my street. I probably drink too much coffee. I got hardly any sleep last night, etc. So they do the usual exercise. Then we ask them to tick the sentences that are true for them. So now because the sentences all begin with I, they can personalize them and think, yes, that's true for me. I didn't get much sleep last night. I was worrying about this talk I had to give today. And after they've ticked them, students work in pairs and take turns to say the true sentences. And again, ask follow-up questions if possible. So it's taking a very simple workbooky type exercise and turning it into a speaking practice, which is very controlled, but still gives them practice in saying the target language. So by doing this, we really wanted to work really hard in lifting the control practice off the page and adding a lot more speaking activities which are very controlled. Here's another example. This is for making questions and to focus on word order, particularly questions with a preposition at the end and subject questions. So they put the words in order, then they work in pairs and ask and answer the questions, which is a fairly simple thing to do if you're teaching questions. If you make all the questions with you, then they can ask each other the questions. To make it even more interesting, we've given a student A and student B different questions. So when they work in pairs, they are asking and answering different questions. This again makes it a more interesting, lively, communicative activity. And this kind of question exercise is really useful even for the most difficult language to practice. I always found that trying to practice articles in class was really hard. Basically, there isn't a lot more you can do than a gap fill or choose the correct words. But by doing it like this, by having the gap fill as part of questions with you, then it immediately sets the activity up to be a communicative practice activity. So here they fill in the gaps with a, and, the, or nothing. Then they work in pairs and ask and answer the questions. So it's a way of practicing these very grammatical bits of language. And again, we give students A and student B different questions, so that when they're working in pairs, they can practice in pairs and ask each other different questions. Okay, so here are some of the ways we have turned these heads-down control written practice into communicative speaking activities. These obviously are all built into face-to-face, as you can see, but these are things you can do as well if you're making your own exercises or need to adapt exercises in other course books. For example, if the writing task is a topic-based sentences, like, for example, bringing up children, so students do a gap fill, word order, choose the correct word, etc. You can add a communicative stage by asking them which sentences they agree with, and then explaining why. If the writing task is personalized sentence with I, so it's a gap fill, etc., but they all begin with the pronoun I, you can ask students to say the sentences to each other and continue the conversation or ask questions, or decide which sentences are true for them, then talk in pairs. If they're questions with you, he or she, you can just get them to ask and answer in pairs, like we showed with the articles and the word order questions we were looking at earlier. Also, if you give them sentence stems with I, like with the infinitive of purpose, I need some money, ... they can complete the sentences, compare in pairs, then ask questions. And if you give A and B students different questions or sentences, it makes it more interesting to ask and answer in pairs in the communicative stage. So one real thing we're trying to do is to increase the amount of speaking that is in the control practice stage of the lesson, where you're mainly working on one specific area of language you have just taught. And I think these days, it's maybe not enough for students to just ask them to do a gap fill and then check the answers. Why not make the gap fill become a communicative speaking activity using these kind of techniques? Okay, here's a question for you. How often do you give your students controlled speaking practice of new vocabulary? Okay, lots of answers coming here. Very often, fairly regularly, every unit, quite often. Not as often as I like, says Sheena. That's interesting. As soon as they learn it, almost every class. Okay, interesting. It was an interesting one there. Gosh, this is going fast. Saying, just follow the book, which is an interesting point, actually, because when we started doing face-to-face, we found that quite often in course books that there's a lot of practice for grammar, but there's not really very much practice for vocabulary. Often the vocabulary is, for example, you just match the words and the pictures in the back of the book, and when you go back to the lesson, you're in a reading or a listening. So the vocabulary isn't really practiced. And we feel if you don't practice it, they're not going to remember it. So another principle we had in face-to-face was we really wanted to change this. We've always felt the vocabulary was just as important as grammar, and therefore it deserves some proper controlled practice on the page, particularly spoken practice, which is often missing from other course books. Again, let me give you some examples to show you what I mean and how we have tried to include speaking practice for vocabulary. Okay, here's a little presentation box where, from pre-intermediate, where they're deciding if they know these words to describe your home. So things like unusual, typical, balcony, fashionable, etc., etc. Students read the sentences, decide which words and bold they know in pairs, then check in the language summary in the back of the book. And these are the sentences they look at. So the words are all in a context about my house or flat. And by doing this, it means the next stage we can ask them to choose sentences that describe their home. Then they work in groups and tell each other about their home and whether they like living there. So the presentation material, because of the way it's structured, immediately becomes a speaking activity. And because students have to choose the words that are relevant to them and to their home, they're the words that they're going to want to need to learn for, the rest of their speaking lives. Here's another example where we have a fairly standard match the verb to the rest of the words and phrases. So visit relatives, have a lie-in, go to concerts or gigs or festivals. So students do that, check in the language summary, teacher deals with any problems. Then immediately we ask them to work in pairs and ask questions. And to help them, we've given them some question stems, like how often do you visit relatives? When did you last have a lie-in? Do you ever go to gigs? So the vocabulary immediately turns into a communicative, personalized speaking activity. Here's another example on relationship words. First, students have to put the words in different groups, family relationships, other relationships. They check in the language summary, teacher deals with any problems. And then the next thing, we ask them to personalize it. So they make a list of all the roles they play in life. Then they work in pairs and discuss the questions. So by personalizing it, it hopefully becomes much more interesting for students, and they can discuss the roles they like, the roles they don't like, and decide how many of the same roles they have. So we felt that was a much more interesting and communicative way of practicing it than just giving them another gap fill. They can do those in the workbook for homework. Much better to make it a speaking activity in the class that's relevant to them. Here's another example where they're looking at adjectives for character. So they have to check the meaning of any new words. Then we ask them to think of 4 people they know and choose adjectives to describe them. And think of reasons why they chose those adjectives. And this is an on their own stage. And it's a very strong principle of face-to-face that we really like giving students preparation time, particularly for speaking activities. Even in your own language, it's quite hard to do this off the top of your head. You need to think of the people, think of the adjectives, think of why. That all needs a bit of thinking and preparation time. And I think coming back to an earlier point about students being shy or not knowing what to say, if they're giving enough time to prepare, they'll be more confident about the speaking activity that follows. So the next thing they do is work in pairs, take turns to tell their partner about the people they've chosen. So the preparation stage leads into a speaking activity, and they can personalize the new adjectives. And finally, here's an example of ed-ing adjectives, where they have to finish the adjectives with the correct suffix. So, which TV program do you think are really boring? What's the most frightening film you've ever seen, etc. This is often done with a gap fill in course books, but by making it questions with you, that means you can immediately put students in pairs, get them to ask and answer the questions. So they're saying the words and giving their own opinions. So it immediately goes from a fairly standard heads down gap fill to a communicative speaking activity. And then we invite them to tell the class a couple of things they found out about their partner. So this is how we can make vocabulary practice more communicative and personalized. For example, we can ask students to choose sentences that are true for them, like with the describing your home vocabulary, then compare and ask questions. So if you present the vocabulary in that kind of sentence form, it immediately becomes a speaking activity. You can also give students question stems, like when did you last have a lie-in, etc., which helps them ask the questions in pairs. Students can also choose words connected to them, or words connected to people they know. This is a really useful thing that you can do with lots of different areas of vocabulary. And I've often found by personalizing vocabulary, which of these words are really important to you, it really helps them remember the key words that they need in their daily lives. And also, if you've got a gap fill, instead of just doing sentences, make them questions with you. So then, after the gap fill, students can ask and answer in pairs. So if you're making your own gap fills, make them questions with you. And that immediately becomes a speaking activity. Of course, if your course book doesn't already do it for you. Okay, just to summarize this section on control practice then. These, I feel, are our principles for successful control speaking practice. Okay, we need to do it immediately after the presentation stage, so after you've done meaning, form, pronunciation, or immediately after a control writing task, gap fill, word order, etc. So in the lesson, that's where it goes. You present the language, do control practice. If possible, try and make the writing task, the gap fill, etc., become the speaking task, because that means you get 2 exercises for the price of 1. And adding the speaking task will make the class a lot more lively and communicative. It's also very important to give students preparation time for these. If they need time to collect language or ideas, make sure they have that time before they speak. And that will really help the shy students, the teenagers, the people who are kind of not so confident or embarrassed about speaking. If they know what they're going to say, they're going to do it much more confidently. And try and choose personalized communicative tasks if possible, because it's always much easier for students to talk about themselves, their own lives and experiences and people they know, than things out there in the world that maybe they don't have an opinion on. Okay, your job while they're writing, doing the gap fill, is to plan how you're going to organize the class. Do you put them in groups, pairs, who's going with who? So you can do that while they're writing. Then for the speaking activity, make sure you give clear instructions and demonstrate the activity, particularly at low levels. I always use a strong student and do the beginning of the activity with them. Also, because it's control practice, correct the mistakes when you hear them, particularly in the language you're practicing, the target language. And after you've corrected it, ask them to say it again, maybe 2 or 3 times, so it helps it stick. And at the end of the activity, it's always good to do a feedback stage with the whole class. You don't have to ask every student. Just get maybe 2 or 3 students to tell you something they found out. It helps wrap up the activity. And if your course book doesn't do this, try and adapt the material in the course book to add a communicative speaking stage to the control practice that's there, using one of the techniques we discussed. Okay, here's another question for you. How can you tell if a freer speaking activity is successful in class? Okay, some interesting comments coming through. Students' involvement, students laughing and joking. Everyone's willing to talk. Yes, exactly. Students reacting positively. Yes. Okay, interesting, Larissa. If you need to stop the students talking, yes, you know it's going well if you're like, please stop, we need to do the next thing, and you can't stop them. Okay, so students are engaged, and very good point when they don't use their mother tongue. Very important point from Claudia. And yes, I think if they're prepared well, they know what they're going to say in terms of ideas and language. That stops them using their mother tongue. So I think preparation is very important here. So yeah, we all know that lovely feeling you get as a teacher when a speaking activity is going fantastically well. Everyone's chatting, having a good time, and we can think, great, this is why we do this job. But of course, it doesn't always happen like that. And it's something that we put a lot of thought into when we were designing face-to-face. And we wanted to establish some important principles that we wanted for our freer speaking activities. We felt that freer speaking activities should always have a clear and achievable outcome. Students need to know exactly what they're doing and what the outcome should be. Also, they should always have a linguistic aim. So we talk about freer speaking, not free speaking. Free speaking, they can do in the coffee bar. In the class, we feel that even though they're using all the language they have learnt up to now, there should always still be a linguistic aim. They should still be fitting the new language into what they already know. It's also important to allow students some alone time to prepare the language and ideas before speaking. And as we discussed, and the feedback has shown, that this is really important to help the students become confident enough to do the speaking. Also, again, if they're personalized, they seem to work a lot better. Although, of course, there's room for lots of other kind of speaking activities too, such as role play. They should be doable straight off the page. So the teacher shouldn't have to add stages to the activity to make it work. Sometimes you can see an activity which, okay, students in groups discuss this, when there's no preparation stage. And without the preparation stage, it often just doesn't work as well. And most importantly, we thought they should help students become both accurate and fluent. And that was the reason that we put the sections in, you may know, which we call Get Ready, Get It Right. These are the activities at the end of the A and B grammar lessons in face-to-face, which focus on freer speaking, where they take the language they've done in the lesson and embed it in with the rest of their language. If you don't know them, let's have a look at a few examples of these, and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, here's one from pre-intermediate after a past simple lesson, where we asked students about the last time they had a special meal. So rather than just say, discuss a special meal, we asked them to make notes on the meal using these bullet point ideas. So this gives them time to think of what they're going to talk about. Because it's not just the language they need to know what they're going to say as well. Students work on their own, make some notes for a few minutes. Then, when you do the speaking activity, where they talk about their special meals, they'll be much more fluent and communicative because they know exactly what they're going to talk about before they speak. And again, with shy or less confident students, this preparation stage is essential to make it successful. And at the end, we ask a few students to tell the class about their partner's special meal. Here's another example, which is from upper intermediate, which focuses on the things you have done for you, things you get other people to do for you, and things you do yourself. So the first thing the students have to do is make lists of which of those things in the box they have done for them, which they do themselves, and which they get other people to do. So this gives them a chance to organize things that happen in their lives into the right language group. When they've done that, they can work in groups and tell each other about the things on their list, asking follow-up questions if possible, as shown in the examples. So they're using the target language of the lesson, but they're also building it into their own language base that they have developed up to now. Here's another example for wishes. This is the first time they see wishes in the course. So here we ask them to write the wishes so that they can get the grammar right in the sentences using the idea. So I wish I had more free time. Don't we all? Then we ask them again on their own to think about how life would be different if your wishes came true. If I had more time, more free time, I'd write a book. Not sure I'd recommend that. You don't get any free time at all if you do that. But so here the students have had time to prepare the sentences they're going to use. They're personalized, and while they're doing this, of course, the teacher is checking that they get them right. So when they're in pairs, here they work in groups, they can tell each other about their wishes and how life will be different. Then by asking follow-up questions, you can develop the conversation. And finally, we ask them to tell the class about one interesting or surprising wish. And right back down, we use this approach even at starter, the lowest level, where here we're doing is there and are there. So we ask them to write 8 questions to ask another student about places near his or her home, using the words on the map, so a park, a supermarket, a shopping centre. So very simple writing questions. Is there a cinema near your home? Are there any hotels? Then, of course, we ask students to work in pairs, ask and answer the questions, give more information if possible. But here we also ask them to make notes on their partner's answers. And this is another thing we like to do, because the next stage, we ask them to work in new pairs, to talk about the places near their first partner's home. So it's a very useful technique. If you've got students working in pairs, you can double the amount of speaking by getting them to work in new pairs and report what they've just been talking about. This is a very simple example using there is, there are, but you can do it with all sorts of bits of language. And often you can just increase the amount of speaking activity by asking them to work in pairs and tell someone else about their first conversation. That's particularly useful for those students who finish early. If you have 2 or 3 pairs that have finished early, the rest are still going, swap them round and get them to tell their new partner about their first conversation. Then at the end, they tell the class about one interesting place near their partner's home. And finally, here's an example using a role play. Not all the exercises are personalized, nor can they be. Here's one where one student is a reporter for a local newspaper, and he is going to interview the other student who's the lead singer of a rock band called Crazy Heads. So this student has to prepare all the questions. And student B is the lead singer of the rock band. He or she has to look at these ideas and make notes about his or her life. So these are both preparation stages, so when they do the role play, they know what questions they're going to ask, and they got some ideas for the answers. And then we put them together, and the interview happens. But again, the preparation stage is a key thing. Without that, it may not work very well in class. Okay, so these are the principles of our Get Ready, Get It Right sections at the end of the grammar lessons. The Get Ready stage allows students to prepare ideas and language on their own, so they know what they're going to talk about and how they're going to say it in English. This alone preparation stage means that students will be more accurate and confident when speaking. And judging from your comments at the beginning of the webinar, that is a really key issue. And that if we can give students the support of preparation stages, they will be more confident when they're speaking to each other in the Get It Right stage. In the Get It Right stage, this allows students to communicate with confidence and have a real conversation based on the ideas and language they've prepared. We also encourage students to go beyond what they prepared by giving more information, follow-up questions. And you'll find that because they prepared the beginnings of the conversations, the rest of the conversation will flow much more easily. Okay, there are lots of ways you can get students to prepare ideas and language in the Get Ready stage. Here are some of the ones we've looked at. You can ask them to make notes, like for their special meal, make lists, like for things you do yourself or you have done for you, write sentences, like for the wishes, or write questions, like for the role play. And also, we can get students to prepare different questions or sentences for A and B students. Again, like for the role play, etc., etc. Lots and lots of different ways, depending on the language level and the task they have to do. Okay, here's another question for you. I need to put these questions in so I can have a drink. What is a teacher's role during freer speaking activities? Please add your comments to the chat box. Monitor, lots of monitoring, facilitating. Providing feedback, encouraging students, very important, yes, I agree with that, definitely. Okay, supporting discussion, correcting mistakes. And yes, I'd agree with all those comments. I think that all that's, and how much you interrupt is an interesting point. Let's have a look at some thoughts I had on the teacher's role during this stage. Okay, I think the first thing is it's very important to set up the get ready stage of the task clearly. Like if they need to prepare ideas and language, show them what they have to do. Don't just tell them. So do a few ideas on the board if necessary. And while they're working on their own, preparing ideas and language, as everyone said on the chat box, monitor, help them with ideas and language. And if they're writing sentences that they're going to use, get in there and correct any mistakes you see, because we want to work on accuracy as well as fluency. Also, organize a class so they're in the right pairs and groups for the Get It Right stage. And that often needs a bit of preparation. You might want to put different students together, have a strong group, a weaker group, etc. And while they're speaking, again, monitor. And I would suggest if you hear any mistakes in the target language from the lesson, you should get in there and correct them. However, try not to get too involved with the actual discussion. I'd just get in there, say that again, and then get out and move to another group. If you get too involved, I often find the students end up talking to you, not to each other. But I still think correction on the spot is important because, again, we want to encourage students to be fluent without losing their accuracy. And as we mentioned before, if you can ask students to report what they've discussed to another student. So stage 1 is A, B, A, B, A, B. And stage 2, you can put the pairs together. So 2 A's and 2 B's can work together, tell each other about the conversation they've just had. Doubles the speaking practice. And also, as people have mentioned as well, do a feedback stage with a few students telling the class what they found out. You don't have to ask everyone, and sometimes these can go on a bit too long, but maybe 2, 3, 4 people may be enough. And also make sure you comment on good communication and ideas as well as good language, because it's about sharing ideas and communicating. It's not just about the accuracy of the sentences. Okay, one other little question for you is, what other stage of the lesson do you often have speaking in class? Okay, in the warm-up, yeah, I agree with that. Pre-reading, beginning of the lesson, after reading comprehension, so before and after reading comprehensions. Talking about the text, very important. At the end of the lesson, like we've been discussing, before and after listenings as well. Okay. And correction, when you're correcting gap fills and things. So there are lots of other opportunities to do speaking activities in the class. And I think there's one thing I used to find was a lot of material, all the speaking tended to be at the end of the lesson. And we've tried to make lots of speaking throughout the lesson. So these are other ways to include speaking in the class. As many people have mentioned, do warmers, speaking warmers that revise language from last lesson. And as you may know in face-to-face, each lesson begins with a quick review, which is a speaking warmer for the previous lesson. So that's already in the book if you use it face-to-face. And I think starting the lesson with a speaking activity is really important because it really gets the lesson off to a lively, student-centered start. Also, try and set clear targets. I find that if you say, for example, find 5 things your partner did at the weekend, you get a much better conversation than talk about your weekend. Students like targets. Also, as people have mentioned, generating interest questions before students listen or read. So if your book doesn't have them, you probably need to add them so that they can tune into the topic of a reading or a listening. And also, as many people mentioned on the chat box, we can ask them to discuss their reaction to or opinion of a reading or listening text. And again, if that's not in the book, that's a little stage you may want to add. And after any exercise, we often ask students to compare answers, but ask them to explain why they've chosen each answer. That means they don't just look at each other's book, they have to speak to each other and say, oh, I put that because. Also, at lower levels, there are often lots of little role-play conversations for gap fills or presentations. Get students to practice those in pairs, to role-play them in A and B pairs. Then, ask them to close the books and practice again from memory. And of course, don't forget to use the class activity photocopyables. There are lots and lots of role-plays, free speaking activities, find someone who's, etc., in the class activities. And this is what we try to build into face-to-face. We try to include speaking throughout the lesson, from the beginning to the end. So there are lots and lots of speaking activities. So just to show you one lesson from our new intermediate book, this is a lesson on social networking, particularly about how social networking can make people lonely. If you can't read that, the cartoon says, sorry, I'd love to come out, but I'm busy updating my Facebook status. Okay, let's have a look at how much speaking there is in there. Firstly, there's a quick review on the second conditional, which gets the class off to a speaking start. Then they do the vocabulary and tick words they know. Then they work in pairs and compare the sentences, as we showed before. Then before the reading, they work in groups and discuss the sentences, so a little discussion before the reading to get them tuned into the topic about social networking. Then, after the reading, they compare answers and ask if they agree with the points discussed. Then they do practice on articles, and then they have to find examples of articles, and they compare answers. And again, here you can ask them to explain why they've chosen each one. Then immediately there's some controlled speaking practice in the back of the book, which is the articles exercise we showed you earlier, where they're asking each other questions with you. Then there's a listening, and again we ask students to explain why answers might be false. And at the end of the lesson, they're in groups writing a survey, which involves a lot of speaking, of course. Then they ask the other students their survey about social networking. Then they work in groups and compare answers. And then they tell class what they found out. So in that lesson, there are 11 separate speaking opportunities built in throughout the lesson. And it's a strong principle of face-to-face. We always begin and end each lesson with a communicative speaking activity. Okay, so you can help your students get better at speaking by taking controlled practice exercises off the page and turn them into speaking activities, as we saw at the beginning. Give students speaking practice of vocabulary as well as grammar. Very importantly, give them time to prepare ideas and language for freer speaking activities, and include as many speaking opportunities in the lesson as you can. Things like warmers, lead-in for text, feedback, etc. Okay, the final thought, therefore, then, is the best way to help your students get better at speaking is do more of it in class. And hopefully, we've shown you some ideas of how you can add more speaking activities to the lesson, and how you can lift more activities off the page and make them into speaking activities in class. Okay, just before that's kind of the end, really, but if you have any questions, please send them through. And in the meantime, just let me promote the next talk, which is 2 weeks today, which is about helping students with listening. For many students, listening is a harder skill to master, and we're looking at how we can really teach students how to listen more effectively. So please join us in 2 weeks. Okay, if any questions, thank you for your comments. Very nice to see them all coming in. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much, Chris. We've still got a little time left for questions, so please type them into the chat box. And a couple we've had in already. A question from Sanjita Bhattacharya, who asks, how do you get a group of, say, 6 students to work together? When I put a group of 6 students together, I find that only 2 of them are doing all the work, while the others are just sitting there. Well, what can a teacher do to avoid that?
Thank you for the question. I guess I'd ask, why do you need 6 in one group? Why not have 2 groups of 3 or 3 pairs, for example? It may well be you're talking about, say, for example, an organised role play where you have lots of people in different roles. For example, maybe they're trying to decide where to build a new airport or something like that. If you do have to have 6 people in there, I think maybe the key is in the preparation, and that you make sure when you're setting up the activity, you give each person maybe 2 different things they have to add to the conversation, so that they are fed maybe through little roll cards or something. They're fed some ideas they need to feed into the conversation. If it is also that you need who you choose to be the chairperson is really important. You need to choose someone who's confident enough to run the conversation, but isn't kind of controlling, so over-controlling, they take over and don't let anyone else speak. So I'd say try and avoid having 6 if you can by having smaller groups, but if you do, give them each something they have to say and choose someone to run the conversation. And therefore, it's their responsibility to make sure everyone speaks, as well as yours.
Okay, thanks. A question now from Eliana Leon Abad, who says, you mentioned correcting students at the moment they make a mistake, and they're making them repeat the correction. Won't that stop them from continuing to produce language? How do you balance that?
Yes, it's always an interesting conversation of when you correct. I personally feel that if it's the language you've been doing in the lesson, I would always correct it when I hear a mistake, because basically that's the reason for today's lesson. So if in a freer speaking activity they're making a mistake with second conditional, and that's the language for the lesson, I'd stop them, get them to say it again. Because if they don't say it right on that day, they're never going to say it right later. However, other mistakes you might let go if they're not part of the lesson. And I agree it's a balance. How often do you go in and correct? But I think if you can develop a technique of just dropping in, correcting, dropping out, and moving away to another group very quickly so you don't get involved in anything else, it helps. Different teachers have their own techniques, though, and I'm not saying, you know, this is the only way to do it. I think that, but as I was saying, I think it's important in freer speaking activities to make sure they stay as accurate as possible as well, and not just say everything and lose all the grammar you've been doing for the last hour or 2.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Another question from Sam Nibbs. How important is setting clear timeframes for students in both preparation and during speaking exercises?
Oh, that's a very good point, actually. Maybe I should have put that in the talk. Thank you. Yeah, I think it is important. I think you certainly need to make sure you know exactly how long you're going to have for this. And usually they take longer than you think, speaking activities, especially with the setup. And I think, yes, maybe when you're doing a get ready stage, you say, okay, you've got 5 minutes to get your ideas in language, or 3 minutes, whatever you feel. Sometimes it can get a bit too much. If you give a time frame for every single thing, students tend to just ignore them, I think. So maybe I'd set a time frame for the preparation stage to help them focus on what they're doing. And then the speaking stage, have a time frame in your head and, you know, see how it goes and cut the activity when you need to. Also, I'd add a time frame for warmers as well, because warmers can go on for half the class if you don't say, okay, this is 5 minutes, that's it, finished.
Okay, thanks, Chris. I think we'll just try to fit in, if we can, just a couple more. One from Stuart McMillan. Do you have any other techniques or advice for encouraging weaker or shyer students, or even students who may be at the wrong level, to participate more in class discussion?
Yes, okay. I think, as we've been discussing, the one thing I've always found really helps the shyer or weaker students is this preparation stage. And, you know, even if all they do is say what they prepared, that'll at least give them some confidence for next time. I think it's also important of who you pair them with. You might find the person sitting next to them is not the best person for them to be talking to. So you might need to move some people around if you can in your class. So there was someone who is more sensitive to their slowness or their shyness, and would be able to help them as well. So I think pairing them with someone maybe who's a bit better, but not the strongest student, is also really helpful. And of course, they're the people, when you're monitoring, the shy or the weaker students are the first ones you go to make sure they're doing it right and they're producing the kind of language that you need both in the preparation stage to make sure they've got the right language to talk, and in the speaking stage to make sure they're working well. And if they're in the wrong level, talk to your director of studies.
Okay, thanks. One final question quickly from Lara Lorenzetto, who asks, how do you monitor pair work? It's always a challenge for me, especially when I have students at different levels and some of them finish earlier than others.
Yes, it's a challenge for all of us, not just for you. I'm sure everyone feels that, particularly if you've got a bigger class. It depends on how your class is organized. If you're in a kind of circle, I kind of sit in the middle. I kind of look in one direction and listen in another, so people don't feel that I look up at the ceiling and I'm listening around to various people. So people don't feel I'm watching them so much. If you're in a class in rows, you can maybe stand at the side. It's harder to get in and help, I appreciate. I think, sorry, what was the second part of that question?
The second part of the question was, it was actually just, I always find it a challenge. Levels and finishing early.
Oh, finishing early, that's right. Well, I think with finishing early, a couple of things you can try is, I often used to find that the same students would always finish early, because they kind of would just do the task, wouldn't ask any follow-up questions. Okay, finished. Particularly true of teenagers. You know, it seemed to be like the boys had a race who could finish the activity with the minimum amount of effort. So they're the people that you need a little extra tasks, like you can maybe have little slips of paper, say, okay, now ask 2 more questions, or change the pairs so they tell each other what they've just talked about. Or little add-on tasks that you can do. If it's a longer speaking activity and they finished, I would maybe get them to just, maybe even do something completely different for a couple of minutes, like one of the practice exercises in the back of the book. But generally, I would think that, with monitoring, it's something you kind of develop as you teach, and everyone has their own style. I've watched hundreds of different people teach, and they all have their different style. And I think that as long as you approach it sensitively, you correct sensitively, and you encourage people, then I'm sure you're doing exactly what you need to be doing. And the ones that finish early, have something up your sleeve for them to do, even if it's just swap the pairs, tell each other what you talked about.
Great, thanks very much, Chris. Lots of interesting questions there. Lots of very positive comments in the chat. Everyone really enjoyed that. But I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today. We've got a lot of other webinars coming up. So next week we've got a double bill of webinars at 3 p.m. UK time. Sedef Kosh will be offering tips for integrating and managing technology with young learners. Then at 4:30, Helen Sanderford will be investigating what good teaching materials should do, starting with vocabulary. A week later, on the 25th, I'm delighted to say Chris is back, offering advice on helping students with listening. And then 2 weeks after that, on April the 8th, is back looking at functional language. And then on April the 15th, Jan McCartan will be returning to the subject of what good teaching materials should do, this time looking at grammar. I'll post links to register for all of those webinars in the chat right now. Thanks very much for attending. Thanks very much, Chris, for an absolutely fascinating session. And we're delighted we'll have you back again soon. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. See you in 2 weeks.